Imagine a vibrant discussion between people that includes both openness and critical thought in the pursuit of truth. The Purchasing Truth podcast is an experience, a journey, an exploration of the impact that negative messages in politics and the media have on our families, community, society, and nation. Join your hosts, Bill Stierle and Tom Hazard, to discover new concepts and language strategies that will reveal effective ways of establishing truth. This podcast series will tackle current events, leadership challenges, healthcare confusion, integrity in business, and many other areas that affect us all. Gain clarity and understanding of the various truth perspectives. Welcome to Purchasing Truth.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Purchasing Truth. I'm Tom Hazard, along with your host, Bill Stierle. And today we're going to discuss objective truth versus subjective truth. And I'm really looking forward to this discussion, Bill, because we have many examples that have nothing to do with politics, although there are some that come into it. But this is something that many of us experience every day in our lives or in our business.
Yeah, that's true. One of the challenges is that how do we do integrity in regards to a thing called accepted social norms? How do you hold somebody accountable for that? And the answer is, well, you kind of can't, because it's really outside something that's either criminal or it's civil. So there's these different laws that, and it's really a little challenging because human beings really struggle with truth. We really do, because we struggle with perception and perspective. We struggle with that. All you got to do is believe something and it becomes your truth, which can be problematic, because as soon as you believe something, it just may not be the truth. And you may want to, as a human being, hold on to that truth because, I don't know, somebody told you it was true and you've never wanted to fact check it and never wanted to make an adjustment to it. So this is a good topic, because there are many instances in businesses where we can, get stuck, as well as in politics, they get stuck between what something is objective, more fact oriented, or something subjective that might be more feeling oriented. I feel like this is a wrong thing to do, versus, hey, there's a law about this. So yeah, and you've had several different experiences in business like that, even recently.
Yeah, no, I have. And it's a really interesting thing to me to think about now. And I'm happy to share with our listeners and try to keep it, relatively easy to understand. But it in some ways, it restores your faith in the fact that, hey, there are certain things that are objective truths that you can count on. I mean, I think today, especially if we look at things going on in our country and our politics, when, there's been an assault on truth, can we really get to truth? Is there absolute right or wrong? Well, not in everything, but in some ways there is some certainty. So for example, I'm a business owner, and we provide services for customers, and they pay various different ways, a lot of times by a credit card. And sometimes you have a customer who, despite your best efforts, feels like they don't feel good about the situation. And even though in that situation, I will offer a compromise,
right,
and a partial refund, because I had somebody who, despite the fact that we provided about 3 or 4 times the amount of service from what they paid for to try to make them happy, at the end of the day, the person wanted something. They were stuck, and they wanted something that was not in alignment with what they paid for, but they had the belief in their mind that they should get something more than what they paid for.
Right.
And that gets to be a difficult situation. So just trying to have an amicable way to end it, I offer, well, look, we don't agree on this, but I'm willing, in the interest of putting this behind us and not having a fight over this, I'll offer you a partial refund of X. And this happened very recently, so it reminded me of this. And this customer refused that. They flat out said, no, I demand a complete and full refund, which really was not in alignment or in proportionality with really the service that was provided in good
And
faith.
on your side is fairness too, and your side is best efforts. It's there, and a belief creates an entitlement, and the word entitlement is a very, very difficult word in politics, is because you're entitled to do something. So Tom, you pay insurance, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. And so that is money that you're saying to this company, hey, listen, if anything goes wrong, you're setting the numbers and I'm in agreement that I'm paying you this money. And therefore, if anything comes wrong, something's going to come back. Well, in the world of politics, as soon as we get into, Medicare and Medicaid and things like that, that's kind of like an insurance. It's kind of like people are paying money in and then they're looking for services to come back out. And there's some limitations to, the amount of services. You can't like get your, plastic surgery or certain things you can't get inside that space because it's not in alignment with what is fairness with that insurance policy. But it's not an entitlement because it's literally something that you're exchanging money for a service. But even though a label can be put and a belief can be put in that way, and that's why this subject called objective truth and subjective truth is really important, because depending how you cast a word, a phrase, a term, you can shift something that used to be in this objective space over to the subjective place, and everybody goes like, oh yeah, that's a bad thing. And you're going like, how did it become a bad thing? I think there's other examples that it's not that. And the fact actually doesn't matter anymore because the subjective interpretation has taken over as fact.
And that is really important to understand, troubling in some ways, but in some ways, I think should be reassuring to people that somewhere there is an arbiter of the facts and there are rules you can rely on. Now, in this case, going back to my example as a merchant, again, the customer had a belief that they were going to get something that really wasn't in alignment with what they purchased. We did our best to provide that service in full, and in fact did more effort. So to us, we spent way more time than what they paid for, but they demand a full refund. So what do they do at that point when they don't accept my partial refund? They can go to their credit card company and claim that what they purchased they didn't get, and try to do what's called a chargeback, reverse the charges. Within a certain amount of time, the credit card company is there to look after the purchaser and make sure that there's no fraud and stuff like that. And so, but here's where it gets into objective truth, is there are only certain reasons that a credit card, holder can say are a justification for why they're reversing the charges. And it's not that, hey, the service that was provided, they didn't do a good job. That's not one that's available.
It's not available.
It's not that, I'm not happy with the result. I mean, it's either it was a fraudulent purchase that they didn't ever actually make it in the first place. And that's a pretty high bar to me. It's pretty easy to prove that that's true or false, or the item or service wasn't delivered. But this is where it's important. This one is what applied in our case, because it is, as long as we can show as a company, we provided service, we delivered, there were deliverables we provided. And the volume and the value of those things is at least in the neighborhood of what was paid for.
Yeah, and that the customer was a participant in that exchange with emails and things like that. They were a participant. They showed up. They exchanged. They were working with your company in order to reach the end goal that, that you were hired to do. And so
That's right. Yeah. I mean, so one of the thing, so we provide this evidence to the, the Visa, the MasterCard, the American Express. The credit card company is the arbiter of truth
Right.
and facts in this situation.
Right.
And we provide that evidence. We even, not only the deliverables, but we provide a transcript of, Zoom calls, which these days we have Zoom calls with clients and they're all recorded for
Oh,
everybody's
wow.
benefit.
Wow.
So you actually say, yeah, this customer participated, so if they claim that they'd never really intended to make the purchase, that's a pretty clear evidence. Well, if they didn't intend to make the purchase, why are they having a conversation with us and engaging in the process?
Right.
But so the Visa and MasterCard, all they look at is, did you do work? Did you deliver it? Or
Right.
did they participate? Was the purchase properly made? There's none of this, well, yeah, I purchased, but they didn't really deliver everything they said they would. Now, obviously, as a company, you want to be in integrity and trying to provide what you promise you're going to provide. But this subjective truth ends up, the customer can really form in their own mind that they should have gotten something beyond the scope of work, beyond what they actually paid for. And honestly, in this case, I felt like we did go above and beyond trying to satisfy them. At the end of the day, that's why I offered a partial refund. But again, the credit card company comes back and says, nope, they intended to make the purchase. You provided service. Again, provided
Right.
service, period, not didn't provide service up to this level that the customer was happy with. It's like, did you do it or did you not? It's very black and white thinking,
right,
on the part of the credit card company. And that's where it gets to objective. So that to me is a really good example of this whole, issue we're discussing today of objective truth versus subjective truth. And there's definitely multiple perspectives to look at this from, and mine as a business owner is only one perspective. I'm sure as a consumer you might think, well, yeah, I paid for this, but they really should have provided that. Well, okay.
Well, this is where it gets unsettling. The objective truth versus the subjective truth. It's like, there's this thing is that once the services are delivered, the value of the services delivered that are decreased. And we've talked about this thing before. And there's an example in the past that we've used called the call girl principle, where the money is paid up front before the intimacy sex act is thing, because the value decreases after. Well, it wasn't that good. Well, you don't get a refund because it wasn't that good. This is what the value was before. And that's one of the hardest things that we're dealing with in our society, is that we're making a purchasing of truth in a certain way, and then we're immediately devaluing the truth because it's from a different party. We're immediately devaluing truth because it's not getting the idea in our mind about what the deliverable is. Even though we're saying, we don't do this thing, we do this other thing. If you want that other thing, you got to go to someplace else. But we do this part of it, and we do this part of it really well. We don't do this other thing. And they go, oh, yeah. Okay, great. And they pay you the money for doing this thing. And they go, but what about the other thing? I said, well, I told you I don't do the other thing. I'm not responsible for X, Y, and Z. That is a different company, a different service. We don't do that part. But I thought you did. Therefore, I want my money back. It's like, no, you only bought this part, and you need this part before you get that other part anyways. And regrettably, in a very disheartening and sad place, is that the subjective part of it is that there's a flexibility in thinking that is a part of the subject part of it, whereas the logic is going to override the interpersonal thing when it comes down to certain business practices or certain political practices. What we're struggling with today is that the subjective viewpoint, well, there were 73 million, therefore we need to fight. It's like, no, that's not the way it works. 81 million is bigger than 73 million. Yeah, but that wasn't the right number. Well, no, votes aren't really subjective. Well, yeah, they are. All we've got to do is just change the messaging, and now they're subjective. We need somebody else to count the votes. And you see the rabbit hole is sitting right there for us to go down. And then a person that could be listening to this and go like, well, no, but our leaders said there were. But did that go into the fact part of it in the court of law? Well, yeah, no, but I don't want to look at that. That there wasn't any evidence to prove it. I want to keep it alive in the subjective world rather than trying to kill it in the objective world. And this is the current trouble and the need for truth. And then the casualty becomes trust. I don't trust you as a person. I don't trust the elections. I don't trust the capitalism. I don't trust the housing market. I don't trust the IT. I don't trust Wall Street. I don't trust Main Street. Oh my gosh, Tom, that we've got to do some work to restore truth and trust between people. I mean, this is where this is. We've got to strengthen, this narrative around truth and create laws that we stick to and hold to, because there's a reason why they're there.
There is a reason why they're there, but unfortunately, they're often laws are not enforced equally. They are not, the same attention isn't given. You have the whole 3 strikes and you're out law,
Right.
Regarding certain types of offenses that are pretty low level, that more
petty
of the
felony, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And 3 strikes and you go to jail. And boy, we were filling up prisons and feeding that, private prison industry. But then when it gets to white collar crime, like, all of the many people that contributed to the 2008 financial crisis, corporate crime, there was one person prosecuted out of all that. And it was not in any way the most egregious crime that was committed here. I mean, a ton of people got away with an awful lot, and the American taxpayer ends up footing the bill to bail out these big companies.
Right.
And same thing, another interesting one where there's a law we were talking about earlier, Bill, was the Hatch Act.
The Hatch Act, great example of that. Yeah, that's another one that in the political setting is that it's very simple. It's like, you don't use public property and public time to do political stuff. Mix those two things. If you want to do it on your own time, then you leave the public property and you go out and do leave the White House or wherever, and you go out and do your event, and then you come back. You hold it independently.
Yeah, you're not supposed to lean on the support of the federal government or your official position to do political campaigning, and you're not supposed to use anything of your office to do that, or take advantage of the, like, for instance, the White House is the obvious sort of prop of authority, among other things that, you're not supposed to do. And I remember back in the Bill Clinton administration, Al Gore, as he was, in his capacity as vice president at one point, he was making some phone calls to request donations from political contributors, and did it from his office as the vice president. And boy, that got blown up as a huge issue in the media.
That was a thing. That was a thing.
But, and then this is, there was no agency or authority who was the known solution to that, to be the police officer, as you will, to pull Al Gore over and give him a ticket. It was very ambiguous as to what was supposed to happen. So there was this law, but there was no real mechanism to enforce it.
So in TV speak, it would be, they have the TV show Law and Order. There was the law, but there was no one to keep the order of things. So it's like, yeah, we did this thing, but there's no one going to enforce it. There's no one empowered to arrest a person by breaking one of these political things that we've guide rails. And what has happened through time is there's been a stretching of those things that we say, this is something that we agreed upon. And the person goes, yeah, I know you've agreed upon, but I don't want to really talk about that because, the president gets to do what he wants. It's not that big of a deal. It'll blow over in the next news cycle. Just wait. I mean, they never say that sentence. They just say, oh, it wasn't that big a deal. They don't say, we're going to wait for the news cycle to move, so this will go away. And those consequences that go with it.
It's very interesting. I think the Hatch Act is a great example of, passing a law that tries to establish, like you say, some guidelines or a guardrail that is trying to govern how our elected officials should act. It sets some boundaries for them, but without setting up what the consequence is. And oftentimes laws like this don't necessarily establish the consequence.
Yes.
Then the law really has no meaning, because this Hatch Act, it gets discussed in the abstract a lot. Oh, you violated the Hatch Act. Well, since there's no, and as Al Gore, I think, coined the phrase, no legal controlling authority to, police it, to enforce it, it becomes this discussion, and then it easily descends into, well, different perspectives of truth. And it becomes this debate of, well, did he violate the Hatch Act or did he not violate the Hatch Act? Yes or no? And then when it came to fast forward to, I think it was 2019, when former President Trump holds a campaign rally at the White House, on the lawn with the White House as a backdrop, that was a more overt violation of the Hatch Act. But at that point, with the sitting Republican president, Republicans in control of the Senate, and no formal process in the Hatch Act to enforce it, what was going to happen? Who's going to enforce it? So, former President Trump sort of more blatantly violated it, because it's like, yeah, well, I don't really care. I don't think the Hatch Act is important, or I don't think it means what you all think it means.
This is what I want, and this is where I want it, and this is what I'm going to do, and just go ahead, make me stop doing what I'm going to do. Well, you can't make me stop what I'm doing. And this is where there's this dance between an overt expression and a covert expression. The covert expression is it's going to go underneath. They're going to do something under the table. And if they get caught, they get caught. But again, there's got to be an enforcing body, and there's got to be a way to bring some kind of consequence. And overt is things, it's like it becomes the make me do it. And what you're doing is so wrong. And so it's like fundamentally, and that is what the money has caused the polarization, the belief, the fixed belief narrative has caused a polarization. And there's the way communication is going. Communication is not slowing down, as you may have noticed. It's speeding up a bit, and it's almost like, I better pay attention to every spare minute. I better be on some YouTube video that's going to reinforce my beliefs, or if I have enough courage, see what the other belief is that's being promoted, so I know what to say in reference to that. And as a human being, I've got to make my choice and make my best guess about how am I going to fight for and advocate and purchase my own truth, to make my world work. And that's where you and I are sitting. And that's almost like the reason why we started this thing 2 years ago, about talking about how do we language truth, because we can't just keep creating rules for the people that have less means and not enforce rules for the people who have enough money to buy their way around the rule. And we really just can't keep doing that, or weaken, and that's what winds up happening, weaken and allow somebody of affluence to slide, where somebody that doesn't have the means to protect themselves go to jail instead of walking, and we need to take some new steps that balance, transparency and secrecy, that balance the diminished reality and loyalty. We've got to get our reality to match so that our loyalty is not myopic or single focused, because that's actually what we got. There's things that are being said that are not true. And we've got to make sure our loyalty does not cloud the truth of what the person is saying or doing, and not be so quick to jump on a new belief that, really doesn't serve us. So, yeah, so it'll be really interesting to see what the next piece of is going to happen with laws and the news media. How are they going to continue to cover, this relationship between objective and subjective truth, and how are they going to cover it?
I don't know how they're going to cover it. I'm interested in that as well. But I think it's also just important for people to have a better understanding of the difference between objective and subjective truth, because it really helps each of us. I think it helps each of us individually deal with the things that we face or the things that we're reading about in the media, and to understand differences. There's definitely it helps people navigate really this world we're living in, and all the information that is being thrown at them.
Yeah, and the there is a way forward. See, it looks bleak at this moment on our podcast. It's like, how do you just deal with this? It's really too complex, and most people have withdrawn. They aren't even listening to the end of this podcast. It's like, oh my God, this is too hard of a conversation. But what makes it valuable is that there is a third way. When we give a empathetic response to both a black and white thinking perspective, as well as a consideration that somebody else's beliefs cause them to take an action that was outside the rule of law, then we can have some compassion. So, for example, it's that if I'm watching somebody that got so energized about their loyalty and they went and marched on January 6th, I need to have some compassion and empathy to realize that that person has been influenced by people to get them to do something that was outside the rule of law. And that trusting the rule of law and trusting the courts and not thinking it's all topsy-turvy. It just isn't. There's many people of integrity that hold the fort down. There's many people that stand there and go, wait a minute, this is the line I stand for because this is what the law stands for. But we've got some work to do because we keep softening things with collective belief. 71 million people, 73 million people voted for the former President Trump. That's a fact that I'm willing to live with. And then there's a fact that I'm willing to live with that Joe Biden got 81 million votes. And I'm not willing to live with the phrase massive fraud. It doesn't meet my need for truth or integrity. I can be compassionate to it. I can say, you've been messaged and people have talked to you and you have a belief that there were massive fraud. Is that right? Yeah, the person says. So people of leadership, and you're really loyal to that leadership, they are telling you that there was massive fraud. Yes. And they're saying that to keep your loyalty. Yes, they are. I mean, that's the path of empathy. At least allows us to have a discussion about the good reason why, I'm on team X versus team Y. Because they're still human beings. Even though I might be in a disagreement with it, I need to be compassionate with the disagreement. And then it'll go better.
I agree. I think if we had more compassion and empathy, people wouldn't, their minds wouldn't boil over to the point where they're willing to, be violent and commit, acts like the insurrection or the attack, if you will, on the Capitol on January 6th. And unfortunately, the former president was, the one who was not only not giving them empathy, he's like
part of the messaging,
adding fuel to the fire that got them angry to take action to try to stop the certification of votes.
Yeah, I'm going to be there with you is enough to motivate a loyal person, voter, to believe that I'm going to be there with you. He wasn't.
Well, and that somehow he's going to protect them from the laws that they're going to break as they're doing. I mean, there's so much that's troubling about all that.
And the limbic brain does not sort that stuff out very well. It doesn't say, hey, listen, you may want to logically thinking that breaking into this building, even though the president told you, may not be your best idea, may not be your best thing. Yeah, I can appreciate that, brain. I can appreciate that you're fired up about this, but this is not the way this community or the United States really works. It just doesn't work quite this way. And you're doing something in a way that's really opposite of the agreed upon norms of certification of elections and this stuff. That's what you're against. So Tom, just to let our listeners know, I mean, the biggest thing in mediation and communication, reducing it, has to do with stepping into a place where you can listen to both sides and be empathetic and compassionate to the various different beliefs that people have, and still not escalate conflict. And that's a good part of my work. Just keep it from escalating so that you can have a discussion that you may end up disagreeing with the belief about the way the world is. But at the same time, you're acknowledging that I do have a standard. I do have a willingness to allow the other human being to voice their beliefs without violence and without force. So very
well, to say, I would say to have a more healthy discourse, right? To have a
Correct.
more healthy engagement or discussion with somebody that doesn't just evolve into name calling and, blaming and shaming and all
Right.
these things that just are so unproductive.
That's right. That's right. They're not collaborative or cooperative. And that's one of the things that gives the United States its strength: collaboration and cooperation. If you don't lean in on those things, instead, you're going to lean in on individualism, identity politics, loyalty for party over nation. It will not go well for us. It becomes which side can get one more vote, and then the other side gets to light a fire to the town. So that's not our strongest strategy. It really isn't. And people are using their words to start the fire. It's not, that's not the strongest, way that a collaborative, cooperative nation or, a active democracy really works. Just isn't. So,
All right, Bill. Well, hey, thank you so much. I really appreciate this discussion and very helpful to me. I hope it was helpful to our listeners as well about objective versus subjective truth.
yep. All right, Tom, thanks a lot. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to this Purchasing Truth podcast. We trust that you have enjoyed this engaging and thought-provoking conversation. Our hope is that you've received value, found clarity, and broadened your truth perspective in this episode. If you did, leave us a review or visit our website, purchasingtruth.com. Join us again for another informative and content-rich discussion here at the Purchasing Truth podcast. Don't just accept whatever information comes your way. Join the discussion. Discover your own voice. Purchase your own truth.